to you, Professor Singh, is Global South in a competition or a combative attitude against the quote-unquote the Global North?
The term Global South was coined in 1969 by an American political scientist called Carl Ogilvy. Now, he had defined the term at that time, defining the relationship between imperial powers and their former colonies. And for a long time, the term was understood in pejorative dependent relationship. Of course, during 1970s, the whole liberation movement, national liberations happened, and gradually global South solidarity came under non-aligned movement, then later, of course, Group of 77 in United Nations. Now, recently, of course, because of enormous connectivity that world has achieved, both in terms of traveling and communications, and therefore increasing interdependence that the world now has given a new confidence to these countries that are largely least, less, or developing countries, which think that they need not any longer depend on the so-called global north, which is again is not a physical term. For example, New Zealand, Singapore, Australia are global north in that sense. So how they can themselves find solutions to their own problems, whether it is climate change or human refugees and so on, that has given a new enthusiasm. And of course, as Rongi just mentioned, the international tensions flowing from Ukraine crisis has, I don't think that. Of course, a certain element of competitiveness will continue because of different visions. Obviously, the Chinese vision doesn't match with the United States vision, and they still work together. So there will be variations in how Global South collectively and Global North collectively, if we can look at them collectively, thinks of resolving issues.
Yeah.
But I think they will still find enormous opportunities and space to work together.
Mr. Hassan, internationally, we see SDGs, which is a big set of goals set by the United Nations. Almost everyone in the world sign on it. How do we see the common prosperity aspired by the Global South vis-a-vis the Sustainable Development Goals set forward by the United Nations? I know these can be a little bit abstract, but in order to understand what is the concept of Global South and how is it developing, I think all these important questions are necessary to be asked. Let me go back once again to Professor Singh first.
President Xi Jinping's visions or initiatives of global development initiative, global security initiative also talk of both security and development being indivisible. That development cannot be isolated in certain limited space. It has to be a global development. So development of India, development of China will be part of the global development. But when it comes to strategies as to how each of these great leaders wish to outline the way to move forward in achieving that global development, that is where we notice the variations. And then, of course, that leads to whole geopolitics that Professor Hussain was just mentioning. But I am repeatedly saying, despite tensions, differences, nations have no option. They have to increasingly work together because all challenges that world faces is not individual challenges. All challenges need global solutions.
Right. Global South economies are innovative, entrepreneurial in their own way. Professor Singh, how do you see that Global South economies are becoming ever more the driving force of innovations and changes, positive changes that the world needs to embrace?
Of the size of a country that China is, it has had political stability for more than 4 decades. That has primarily catapulted it to what it is now, nearly 20 trillion economy with deep pockets and leverages to influence not just its own destiny, but also destiny of the world in that sense. India, likewise, is already now the 5th largest. In maybe less than 2030, it is supposed to become the 3rd largest economy. So they provide capabilities to these countries. So China today can go out and invest $1.5 trillion in about 100 plus countries. India likewise has launched several solar network, biofuels networks, and so on. including the corridor that was just mentioned.
Yeah.
So I think that two countries, largest countries of global south, has not just had the wisdom, traditions, but also now increasingly capabilities. So in that sense, China and India emerging as two very important players in global governance. BRICS, for example, New Development Bank, so many examples of how these countries are showcasing by example how development can be shared with other countries.
Yeah.
And since they were and still continue to be developing countries, their understanding of developing countries' issues is very different. And we now know that the G7 Global North in last 30, 40 years has messed up global development. Rapid urbanization has led to climate crisis and inequality and so on. That is why both in India and in China, enormous focus of their leaders on equity and justice.
Trade disputes, for example, about coming from Professor Singh and Mr. Rong, before we wrap up, about common prosperity among and between the members of the Global South.
Prosperity instead of rivalries will be the only way world will go, and states that are often responsible for increasing rivalries, politicians that often do that, will have to make way for societies to connect, and particularly young people. And why Africa has too many suitors? Because Africa has median age of 18 years. China has 38, India has 28. So that is why young people are going to be more productive, they will consume more, they will innovate more. So I think world's increasingly connectivity will ensure that the global shared prosperity will inevitably be the main goal. Of course, we'll have to find ways how to work together despite our varying understandings and visions that world leaders have.
Okay.
I'm sure they'll find way out of it. And I must say that I do respect countries other than India and China. And I believe Egypt, with $500 billion of GDP, is a very powerful country that works closely with so many countries together.
Yeah.
Likewise, Indonesia is largest country. I was just mentioning China and India being inordinately large. I mean, the third largest country in population is 1/4 of either China or India. So if China and India solve their own problem, they have solved a lot of problems of the world already.
I think the